Great to see you here. I'm excited to speak with you today. Before we get started, I want to hear from you about your experiences with storytelling. What is your biggest struggle when it comes to storytelling? So think about that. When you have to tell a story, public speaking, maybe you need to do a toast at a wedding, what is the hardest thing for you? So think about that. And I'm going to call on a few people at random, okay? So don't be afraid, I'm going to come near you, okay? Ida, you are a professional storyteller. What is the hardest thing for you? Maybe can we have the microphone? Do we need it?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. What's the hardest thing for you?
I think that can be hard for a lot of people, but I think challenge, especially in television now, and with social media, it's so fast paced. So to keep the intensity and to keep the viewer's attention, I think, through a television story, because people have so many options.
Right.
So yeah, keeping the interest up. Really,
yeah.
With the content, with the person that's talking in the story.
Yeah. Keeping the pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Ida. Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Who is next? What is your biggest challenge when it comes to storytelling? I'm going to call on someone who looks like they might have a big voice. How about you? What's your biggest challenge with storytelling? You don't need a mic, probably.
I guess it's the struggle to find as well, thinking the correct story. So if it's small intimate situations, listening to what the person's saying to you, so you can engage on that, but then also finding the appropriate story to get across the message or whilst being in the room and people without.
Yeah, off the cuff storytelling.
Yeah, so not forever thinking what I'm going to say because you also want to hear what the other person is telling you.
Yeah.
But you then obviously need to be ready to
Right. And you don't want to be like, oh, what are we going to say next? But then it ruins the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. I got it. Okay. Somebody in the back. We're not going to let you go. How about you? What is your biggest struggle with storytelling? Oh my gosh, the microphone. That's great. Yeah.
No, I think like for me, one difficult thing is when you're telling a story, people weren't there, right? Yeah. And for me, sometimes it's hard to know what's detail and what's important. So I think like what I just said of keeping the pace, but more in the sense that it's so easy sometimes to, get lost into small details that maybe are quite funny and they enrich the story, but are they really needed?
Right. And then you go into other stories.
Exactly.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. One more person. How about you? What's your biggest struggle when it comes to storytelling?
She took my words.
What's the second biggest struggle?
That's one of the things that we have to keep grabbing the attention of the people. I look at the eyes and I try to see in the eyes whether what I'm telling makes sense or whether I'm losing on details.
Right.
And when I feel that I'm losing on details, then I start thinking, how am I going to recover from this situation? Right. That's one tough thing. The other stuff is, if I'm telling a story about myself, that something has happened. Yeah, the other kind of stories is that I have to invent a story. I have to give a lesson to students. And that's the issue that you have raised, memory. Am I going to forget something? So sometimes I'm not concentrated on what am I going to miss, that what am I going to tell. That is also my second issue. But maybe it's aging and that's that has nothing to do with younger people.
Okay. Thanks. Great, thank you so much. All right, thank you for sharing, everyone. So one of my biggest struggles when it comes to telling stories is getting emotional when I share something really vulnerable in front of my audience. Like back in 2020, I was asked to do an online presentation for a global organization out of San Francisco called, what was the name of that organization? It is, I forgot the name of the organization. It doesn't matter, it's a global organization. And they asked me to do a presentation on women in leadership. Oh, it's called General Assembly, I just remembered. They asked me to do a presentation on women in leadership. And I put together a presentation that was about women, and the message was, women must speak up if we're going to rise to our career potential. And I was really excited about this presentation because it's a topic that's been very dear to my heart for a long time. So I worked really hard preparing this presentation, and we had 1,500 signups already only a week out, but I was struggling because I still didn't know what story am I going to tell to launch this presentation. I couldn't think of a story. And then one day out of the blue, my sister called me from Texas. And she called me to tell me that my mom, our mom, had died suddenly. And you can imagine in that moment, I was devastated. And it wasn't just because of my mom's death, but it was because 9 months earlier, I had also lost my dad. So I postponed the presentation by about a month, and I got on a plane to Texas to go be with my family and take care of my mom's affairs. And during the course of that month, I reflected on my mom's life. And what I saw was really wonderful, and I don't think I realized it until I took the time to reflect on my mom's life. My mom was an incredible communicator. She was clear, she was direct, she was funny, and she was a fantastic storyteller. She used her communication skills throughout her career. She worked with politicians in the Capitol in Texas and Austin. And she also worked with some of the most powerful business leaders in the state, including the CEO of Southwest Airlines. But I knew that my mom wasn't always confident speaking in public like that, because she told me stories of when she was a kid and when she was in high school, where she was shy, and she was awkward, and how she really struggled inside of that macho Texas culture to raise her voice as a woman. So about a month later, I went back to San Francisco, and I did that presentation online. And what story did I tell to lead the talk? I told the story of my mom. Because my mom represented everything that I wanted those women to understand. I wanted them to also see that they could go from being shy and awkward to being incredibly confident and successful in their communication style. And it was really hard to tell that story. You can imagine it was only a month after my mom had died, and I was online in front of 1,500, 2,000 people. It's already a lot of pressure, and then you tell a story about your mom's death, your mom's life. It was really hard, but I didn't cry. I managed to hold it together, and it was a very successful presentation. And many, many people reached out to me after that, and they told me, many women reached out and said, wow, that was such a powerful presentation. And it was primarily because of the story you told about your mom at the beginning. So what I learned from that experience was that, yeah, sometimes it's really hard to share a vulnerable, emotional story. But when your story matches your message, then it's like magic. So how many of you have tried to share a vulnerable, emotional story in front of an audience like this before? Let me see, show of hands. Who's tried? Okay. Yeah, well, good. That makes me so happy, because we all know. Oh, wait, no, I did it too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, okay, all right. That makes me happy, because we all know that stories are how we connect with our audience. And honestly, that's the only reason why I'm such a story junkie, is because I love connecting with people. It's the only thing I really care about. So stories are how we connect with our audience. We all know this, but What's really hard sometimes is finding the right story that matches your message. So how do we do that? And that's what we're talking about today. So that says story mining, and that's what this is. We're mining for stories in our lives. And this can also be for business too, but we're looking for stories that communicate our message because stories deliver messages. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 things today. I'm going to start with how to clarify your message. Second is something called story mapping to find stories. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So I encourage you, if you have questions, make a mental note, write them down, and we'll have some time at the end so we can answer them. All right, so let's start with how to clarify our message. Well, I think we can all agree that great storytelling starts with a clear message. There are a million stories to tell. Your whole life is a story. So how are you going to choose the story? Well, you've got to know what you want to say. What do you want to say? What's your point? You'd be surprised. All the students I work with at Stanford, people at Google, really, really smart people, sometimes they'll come and they'll say, okay, I want to tell this story. And I say, great, okay, so what are you trying to say with that story? Like, what's the message? And it's really hard for them to figure it out because stories can have many messages and it's hard to kind of detangle them, right? So what we got to do is we got to get clear on our message before we start looking for the stories, because if not, we'll just get lost in our lives looking at stories. All right. So number one, what's your message? What's the point? And not only what's your point, but also, why do you care about this, right? Why do you care? Why do you care about this message? Because if it's not clear why you care, then your story's not going to land and you're not going to be able to find the right story either. So what we're talking about here is ethos, right? Aristotle taught us this: ethos, pathos, logos. Ethos is the passion. Why do we care? Our audience has to feel that we care about this issue. So we need to be clear about why we care. Sometimes we don't really know. It takes a little digging. So there's an exercise I like to do with my students. It's called peeling the onion. And peeling the onion is a pairs exercise. And it's something that you could do maybe as an exercise in Toastmasters, or if you're preparing to do a talk, you can do it with a friend. It's a really helpful and easy exercise to do. And this is what it looks like. So that says pairs exercise right there. So essentially, you tell your partner to say, oh, okay, so I'm going to do a talk about, right? So maybe it's just high level topic. I'm going to do a talk about living in Portugal, for example. Okay. Oh, okay. Really? Why? Well, because da, 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 da. Oh, really? Okay, why? I mean, you're literally just going down and you're asking the question why over and over and over again until you land at something that feels like, oh, this is a point. Like, I care about this. I want to talk about this. And it helps you be concise as well when you're working with another person, because often what happens is we can just do a lot of talking and say like, well, this, and then people are not paying attention to you anymore. But if it's a conversation, then you have an obligation to your conversation partner to say, hey, wait, I don't understand. It's a conversation, right? So you're working together to help you refine your message and point. So that's step number one. Here's an example of what that looks like in practice. So I'm doing a talk about women in public speaking. Why? Because public speaking is an important skill for women. Why? Because being able to speak confidently in front of a group will open doors for you. Well, why is that important for women? Because women must speak up to reach their career potential. So that might have been a conversation I had with someone trying to get me clear on my topic. Because women in public speaking is huge. You actually need a point around that, right? So that's step number one. What is your message? Why do you care? What are you trying to say? And then once you get clear on your message, then you can start looking for stories, okay? So let's talk about story mapping for a second. So you've all seen a narrative arc before. There are lots of different narrative arcs. There are lots of different ways you can talk about this. This is the one I use because I like to draw students' attention to things. Number one, you'll notice it says time phrase here. The reason why I don't write setup or other things that you often see is because what I find is people spend too much time here. They spend a lot of time in context, and context, if you have too much context, it's just, you lose people. You need to get to the problem right away, as quickly as possible. So the time phrase just grounds people in the moment, and then you can go from there. So when I say time phrase, I mean, for example, in 2020, or when I was a kid, or last year, or whatever time phrase it is. And then what's great about that is you don't need to say, I'm going to tell you a story now. Don't say that, just say your time phrase and then keep going, because people know you're in a story if you introduce the time phrase, okay? So time phrase, get your problem as quickly as possible. Then of course you've got tension here, you've got some details, which I don't really go over because they come naturally. The solution is important. We need to know, well, did the problem get solved or not? Right? We just need to know, is it solved or not? Because if we don't know that, then it creates this open story, which is uncomfortable for the audience. They're like, wait, what happened with that thing? Okay, so we want to know, did the problem get solved or not? Sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay too. That's a different story. This is the most important piece, and this is what we're going to focus on, is the connect the dots part. Some people would say, oh, it's the resolution. Same thing. Connect the dots is where you share your message. Connect the dots is where you tell your audience, like, hey, this is what this meant for me. This is what I learned. This is what I believe now because of this experience. A lot of people think that the story is enough and that you don't need to be explicit with the message, but I disagree. I think that it's important to say your message at the end to connect the dots for your listener, because if not, they could draw many conclusions from your story because stories are rich. So connecting the dots at the end, this is where that message goes that you found, okay? So, for example, women must speak up if we want to reach our potential. Stick that at the end of your story arc, okay? That's where we start looking for stories. Then we can start asking ourselves questions. Questions like this. When did my perspective about this change? Right? So you're looking back over your life. Oh, what were the different times that maybe I did public speaking, or I witnessed a woman public speaking, or maybe I was a kid and my mom was yelling at a group of us, like that's public speaking too. When did I notice a change in my perspective on this? How did my perspective transform? And this is really important. We're talking about transformation, okay? Every story is a story of transformation. So going from what to what, from something to something, there's always a change in a story. So getting really clear about that is important. And then finally, what other times in my life have I experienced the same transformation? And that's where it gets juicy, because when you know the transformation, you don't have to necessarily talk about public speaking anymore. You can talk about anything as long as the transformation is the same. So the idea is that you're working backwards. You have your message first. You know that says transformation. You know what transformation is. For example, my mom, from feeling shy and awkward to being really confident in her communication. So that was her transformation. Connecting the dots, this is the message that we get with that transformation. And let me break it down a little bit more for you, because I'm imagining you're thinking, yeah, but how do I know what the transformation is if I have the message? Well, to speak up, you need confidence, right? What gets in the way of confidence? What's the opposite of confidence? The opposite of confidence is feeling shy and awkward. I chose that story about my mom because I knew a lot of the women in that webinar had that problem. So that was really relevant to them and they could relate to that, okay? So This is an example, focusing on the transformation and then looking at your life or other stories, if you're telling stories for business, that have the same transformation. That's where you find the good stuff. So let me show you an example. This was a student of mine. Let me show you a video, but I'm not sure if it's going to. Let me see the video.
I can see the video yet.
Oh, the video is, no, it's
No, it's
right, it's
before.
before, go back. Before this, it's just not there.
No. The slide before.
It's
Ah,
this.
it's
Okay, great, okay, great. All right, so this was a student of mine at Stanford a couple years ago in the MBA program. His name is Andrew Lowe. So in the program that I work with students in, they deliver 9-minute mini TED Talk style talks on the topic of their choice. So Andrew did a great talk. And I am going to share the first couple minutes of his talk with you where he tells his opening story. And I want you to listen to the story and listen for the transformation. What is the transformation that he's communicating? From what to what? Okay, here we go. Oh, can you press play maybe?
I am 7. Every day before school, I turn on the TV and watch my favorite science show for children. It is nerdy and sciencey and marvelous. There are colors and bubbles and explosions. I love it. Now, one day before school, I turn on the TV. It's not playing. Very weird. Day 2. Same thing. Mommy, what's happening? My mom tells me that the show's been moved. It now plays when I'm in school. Why would you play a children's show when children are in school? How dare you? Adults are so stupid. My mom says, chill, bro, chill. She says that I should write a letter to the TV channel. She doesn't think I write the letter. I am angry and I write the letter. We mail it in together. Now, the next week, I turn on my TV and like magic, my show is back. Now, once again, every day before school, I get colors and bubbles and explosions and my life is once again amazing. What did I learn as a 7-year-old? Anger ignites action, ignites change.
Okay. All right. I'm sad that Andrew's head is getting cut off there. Okay. All right. So what is the transformation that Andrew is communicating here? High level. What's the transformation? You can shout it out. What do you think? From what? What? Anger. Anger. Okay. To
Action.
action. Right. From anger to taking action. Exactly. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay. Right. So we got the transformation down here from being angry to taking action. This was his whole thing. And his message was anger can be a powerful catalyst for change. That was what his whole talk was about. But Andrew didn't come to me wanting to tell the story of how he got this TV show turned back on when he was a kid. No, he came to me with an incredible story to tell. And that was how, he's from Malaysia, that was how he helped the Malaysian government. He helped overthrow the Malaysian government in 2018 because their leader basically ran away with $4.5 billion of people's money. So him and his friends got together and they overthrew the government. So that was the story he came to me with. And we couldn't find an opening for his story. There are a million ways to attack that. It's so juicy, right? But we couldn't figure it out. And so we started story mining. And I said, well, what are some other times in your life where you went from being angry to taking action? And almost immediately he goes, when I was a kid, and then he tells that story. And it was amazing because what happened then is you can tell two stories at the same time that deliver the same message, and it makes it so much more powerful. Because being a kid and being angry about your favorite show, everybody can relate to that. But who can relate to overthrowing a dictator? Not many people, okay? So it really helps you ground your story in something relatable for your audience. So that's the example of story mining. That's how you can use a message and clear understanding of transformation to find other stories that would be interesting for your audience. Okay, so this is a tool that I use with my students to help us do this. Mainly, it is to help them get really clear on the different parts of the story, because let's face it, stories can be complex and complicated, and you can fall into other stories and you don't even know it. So mapping it out like this, I'm a very visual person, mapping it out like this has always helped me, and it's helped me help my students a lot. So, and these are questions to help you fill in the blanks, essentially. And what I encourage you guys to do, because this is a valuable resource if you're interested in storytelling.
This is so challenging. I don't know what's going on.
Can you advance it? Yes, okay, thank you. So you can get the guide and use it yourself. Just, it's a PDF, you can print it out. It's really helpful for mapping out your story, just like it says. So get it and use it. Start with the transformation. I encourage you, start with the transformation. Don't get confused, because stories can be really complex and slippery, okay? All right, so. Okay, Rui, I think, can you just advance me? Awesome, all right. So let's go to Q&A, and yeah, happy to take your questions. What questions do you have, either about story mining or just anything about storytelling? What's coming up for you right now? Anybody? Yes.
Why do you think telling stories is such a good way to communicate?
Ooh, oh my God, I could do like a TED Talk about this. So there are so many reasons stories communicate complicated messages really fast. Stories are visual, and we were first visual people. Before we had writing, before we had words, we were visual people. Stories are emotional, and we learn through emotions. We learn by feeling things. I mean, how many of you have had to have a really hard lesson emotionally before you actually changed your behavior? That's true, actually. We change our behavior when we hurt. So when we can communicate pain to people, then there's a higher likelihood, it's been proven, that they will change their behavior. That's why, for example, NGOs they've gotten good at storytelling, because they understand that if you can get your audience to feel, to empathize with you, then you can actually earn more money. So storytelling is really powerful for fundraising. It's powerful for selling. I mean, we all know this, right? Yeah, those are just a few reasons. People remember stories because of mirror neurons, and I could go on for days, but it really is the most powerful way. And one of the things I teach a presentation skills course, and I teach a formula, excuse me, a formula for how to start your presentation, the first 5 minutes of every presentation. First, you connect by asking a question, and then you hook your audience by telling a story. Always, always, always. Always, always, always. That's the way I do every presentation. And what I hear all the time, especially from execs at big fancy companies, say, oh, I don't have time to tell a story. You don't have time not to tell a story. So, yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you for that, question. That made me happy. Yeah, yes,
I've been telling stories over the years, I guess.
yes.
Are you feeling there's a change over the last years, especially, and more recently, I would say, more recently, there is one thing called ChatGPT.
Mhm.
Have you tried to improve your stories with ChatGPT?
Ooh, that's
Have
such a
you
good
had that?
question. That's a great question. I don't use ChatGPT for that. I use ChatGPT for other things. Partially because I really enjoy storytelling and I don't need to outsource that. Like that's where I get my joy. But I do use ChatGPT for a lot of other things in my work. It's a great resource, but you know, it's funny that you asked this because the last time I taught a session at Stanford, I led with the question, do you think ChatGPT can write an effective mini TED Talk for you? That was the question, and I had people discuss. And half the class said yes, and half the class said no. And at the end, I answered that question. And I said, in my opinion, I don't think so. Because stories are from your personal experience, from lessons you've learned from your life. And ChatGPT does not, it doesn't have stories that are its own. It's regurgitation. So there's a difference there. It's not felt experience. So thank you for that question. Yeah. And I just got a red card, so I think I have to just stop talking.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.